Ethan Cole stood outside the glass tower, hands shaking, knowing the next 5 minutes could destroy him. Inside that building, behind mahogany doors on the 42nd floor, sat Aria Bennett, the youngest CEO in the company's history. Beautiful, untouchable, brilliant. And he was supposed to walk in there and ask her out, not because he wanted to, because a group of executives in $1,000 suits had made it a joke, a dare, a way to humiliate the construction worker who didn't belong in their world. But what those men didn't know was that Ethan had just discovered something that could bring their entire empire crashing down. Before we begin, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it pulls you in, hit that like button. Now, let's dive in. The job site smelled like concrete dust and diesel fuel. Ethan Cole wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his gloved hand, squinting against the late afternoon sun that turned the skeletal framework of Tower Zenith into a grid of shadows. His back ached, his knees ached. Hell, even his teeth ached from clenching his jaw through another 12-hour shift. But that was the deal when you were 32, raising a kid on your own, and one bad week away from losing everything. Cole, you got those rebar measurements yet? Ethan turned. Jimmy Ortiz, the site foreman, stood 20 feet away, clipboard in hand, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Yeah, just finishing up. Ethan knelt beside the foundation trench, double-checking his notes. The numbers didn't sit right with him. Hadn't sat right for 3 days now. The concrete pours were off, not by much, but enough. Enough that someone who knew what they were doing would notice. Enough that someone who didn't give a damn might ignore. He stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. Jimmy, you seen the spec sheets for grid section C7? What about them? Thickness is wrong. We're supposed to be at 18 inches minimum for load bearing. This is barely 14. Jimmy's face tightened. That's what the plans say. The plans are wrong. Then take it up with Donovan. Ethan's stomach dropped. Marcus Donovan, Senior VP of Operations, the man who signed off on every decision, every cost cut, every corner that got shaved just a little too close. Donovan didn't like questions, didn't like workers who thought too much, and he especially didn't like Ethan, who'd had the nerve to point out a safety issue on the last project. Right, Ethan muttered. I'll do that. Jimmy walked away, and Ethan was left standing there, staring at the trench that was going to become the foundation for a 40-story building. A building that would house offices, restaurants, maybe even apartments, people, families, kids like his son, Dylan. He pulled out his phone. No new messages. Dylan was at his after-school program until 6, which gave Ethan just enough time to finish here, grab a shower at the gym, and pick him up before the late fee kicked in. The late fee he couldn't afford. The late fee that would mean choosing between that and groceries. God, he was tired. Hey, Cole! Ethan turned. 3 men approached from the temporary office trailer, and he recognized them immediately. Preston Vale, Jr., VP of Acquisitions, with his slicked back hair and shoes that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. Beside him, 2 others Ethan had seen around but didn't know by name. All of them wore suits. All of them wore smiles that didn't reach their eyes. What's up? Ethan asked, wary. Preston grinned. We were just talking about you. That right? Yeah, you've been here, 6 months? 7. 7, right. And you're good at what you do. Real solid, blue-collar work ethic. Ethan said nothing. Guys like Preston didn't hand out compliments unless they wanted something. So here's the thing, Preston continued, glancing at his companions. We've got a little wager going. See, my buddy here thinks you don't have the guts to walk into Aria Bennett's office and ask her out. Ethan blinked. What? The CEO. You know who she is, right? I know who she is? Great. So the bet is whether you'll actually do it. We're talking cash on the table. I said you wouldn't. You seem like a smart guy. You know your place. The words landed like a punch. Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm not interested in your games. It's not a game. It's a dare. And if you do it, we'll make it worth your while. Let's say $500. 500? Cash. Today. All you got to do is walk up to the executive floor, knock on her door, and ask her to dinner. That's it. One of the other men snickered. He won't do it. Look at him. He's scared. Ethan's pulse quickened. $500. That was Dylan's school supplies for the semester. That was the overdue electric bill. That was breathing room. But it was also humiliation. They weren't offering him money because they believed in him. They were offering it because they wanted to watch him crash and burn. "Forget it," Ethan said, turning back toward the trench. "Come on, Cole, don't be boring." "I said no." Preston stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know what your problem is? You think you're better than this, but you're not. You're just another grunt who clocks in, clocks out, and disappears. Nobody here even knows your name. You want to stay invisible forever?" Ethan's fists clenched inside his gloves. He wanted to tell Preston to go to hell, wanted to walk away. But the truth was, Preston was right. Ethan was invisible. He'd been invisible his whole life. The scholarship kid who didn't quite fit in. The dad who showed up to school events in work boots because he didn't own anything else. The guy who ate lunch alone because he didn't have time for friends. And $500 was $500. "Fine," Ethan said quietly. Preston's grin widened. "Seriously? Yeah, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for the money." "Fair enough. Let's go." "Now? Why wait?" Ethan glanced at the trench, at the unfinished work, at the plans that were still wrong and getting wronger by the hour. Then he looked at Preston, who was already walking toward the parking lot, and realized he didn't have a choice. Not really. Not if he wanted to keep the lights on. He followed. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like descending into hell in reverse. Ethan stood in the corner, still in his work clothes, still covered in dust, while Preston and his friends talked and laughed like this was the funniest thing they'd ever done. The glass walls of the elevator revealed the city below, sprawling and indifferent, and Ethan wondered what the hell he was doing. "You nervous?" Preston asked, smirking. "No." "You look nervous." "I look like I've been working all day." "She's gonna eat you alive, man. You know that, right?" Ethan didn't answer. He'd seen Aria Bennett exactly twice. Once during a company-wide meeting 6 months ago, when she'd stood at the podium and talked about innovation and integrity and building something that mattered. She'd been confident, sharp, the kind of person who didn't waste words. The second time was 3 weeks ago, when she'd walked through the job site with Donovan and a team of engineers. She'd asked questions, good questions, questions that made Donovan uncomfortable. Ethan had liked that. The elevator dinged, 42nd floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it belonged in a museum, polished marble, floor-to-ceiling windows. A receptionist who looked up from her computer with the kind of expression that said, "You don't belong here." "Can I help you?" she asked. Preston stepped forward. "We're here to see Ms. Bennett. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but then you'll need to schedule one. It's urgent." The receptionist's eyes flicked to Ethan, taking in the dirt on his jeans, the scuffed boots, the high-visibility vest. "I'm sure it is." Preston leaned on the desk, flashing his corporate ID badge. "I'm Junior VP Vale. This is official business." She hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Let me check if she's available." Ethan's stomach churned. This was insane. He should leave, just turn around, walk back to the job site, and forget this ever happened. But then he thought about Dylan, about the bills, about the fact that $500 might as well be $5,000 in his world. The receptionist hung up. "She'll see you, but only for 5 minutes." Preston grinned. Perfect. They walked down a hallway lined with abstract art and plaques, celebrating company achievements. At the end, a set of double doors stood partially open. Preston knocked once, then pushed them wider. "Ms. Bennett? Sorry to interrupt." Aria Bennett sat behind a desk made of dark wood and glass, reviewing something on her laptop. She looked up, and Ethan's breath caught. She was younger than he expected, 30, maybe, with dark hair pulled back, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to see straight through you. She wore a gray suit that probably cost more than Ethan made in a month, and she didn't smile. "Mr. Vale," she said coolly, "what is this about?" Preston stepped aside, gesturing to Ethan. "My colleague here has something he'd like to ask you." Aria's gaze shifted to Ethan. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan felt like an idiot, like a child, like exactly what Preston wanted him to feel. "Well," Aria said. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. His mind raced. He could do this. He could ask her out, take the money, and leave. It didn't matter. It was just words, just a stupid dare. But then he saw it. On the corner of her desk, a set of blueprints, the same blueprints he'd been staring at all week. Tower Zenith, grid section C7, and the measurements were wrong there too. Ms. Bennett, Ethan said slowly, I need to talk to you about the foundation. Preston's grin faltered. What? Arya leaned back in her chair, studying Ethan. Go on. The concrete pours on the west side of Tower Zenith. They're not meeting spec. Someone signed off on 14 inches when the plans call for 18. That's a 4-inch difference on a load-bearing foundation. It's dangerous. The room went silent. Preston laughed nervously. He's joking. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Ethan said, his voice steady now. I've been checking the numbers for 3 days. Someone changed the specs to save money, and if you don't fix it, that building is going to have serious structural problems. Arya's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Interest, maybe even respect. Who signed off on the changes? She asked. Ethan hesitated, then said it. Marcus Donovan. Preston's face went pale. You can't just... Get out, Arya said quietly. Ms. Bennett, I said get out. All of you except him. Preston stared at her, then at Ethan, and for the first time, Ethan saw something other than arrogance in the man's face. He saw fear. The door closed. Ethan and Arya were alone. She stood, walking around the desk, and stopped a few feet away from him. Up close, she was even more intimidating. Not because of her title, but because of the way she looked at him, like she was seeing someone real for the first time in years. What's your name? She asked. Ethan Cole. And you work on the Tower Zenith site? Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. It makes me feel old. She crossed her arms. Why are you telling me this? Because it's the truth. You could lose your job. I probably already have. Arya studied him for a long moment. Then she walked back to her desk, picked up her phone, and dialed. This is Bennett. I need the engineering team in my office in 10 minutes. And get me Marcus Donovan. She paused. I don't care if he's in a meeting. Get him. She hung up and looked at Ethan. You better be right about this. I am. And if you're not, then I'm fired and you've wasted 10 minutes. A faint smile touched her lips. Fair enough. The next hour was a blur. Engineers arrived with laptops and tablets. Plans were spread across the conference table. Ethan explained what he'd found, and at first they looked at him like he was crazy. But then one of them pulled up the original specs, compared them to the revised ones, and the room went quiet. He's right, the lead engineer said. These revisions weren't approved by the design team. Arya's jaw tightened. Who authorized them? Donovan's signature is on the approval form. Get him in here, now! Marcus Donovan arrived 15 minutes later, looking annoyed. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. Arya, what's this about? I'm in the middle of... Sit down, she said. He blinked. Excuse me? Sit down. Donovan sat, his eyes flicking to Ethan. Recognition, then anger. Why is he here? Because he just saved us from a lawsuit, Arya said, and possibly a collapse. She slid the blueprints across the table. You signed off on reducing the foundation thickness on Tower Zenith. Why? Donovan barely glanced at them. Cost efficiency. We were over budget. By how much? 2%. And you thought shaving 4 inches off a load-bearing foundation was the solution? It's within acceptable parameters. It's not, the lead engineer interjected. Not even close. Donovan's face reddened. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know what I'm doing. Then explain, Arya said coldly, why the math says otherwise. For the first time, Donovan hesitated. Ethan watched him, saw the gears turning, saw the moment he realized he was cornered. This is ridiculous, Donovan said, standing. I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated by some... You're fired, Arya said. Silence. Donovan stared at her. You can't do that. I just did. Security will escort you out. The board won't stand for this. The board will stand for whatever I tell them. And what I'm going to tell them is that you endangered lives to pad your bonus. Now get out of my building. Donovan looked at Ethan, and the hatred in his eyes was palpable. You're dead. You hear me? You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Maybe, Ethan said quietly. But at least I can sleep tonight. Security arrived. Donovan left, still shouting threats. When the door closed, Arya sank into her chair, rubbing her temples. The engineers filed out, murmuring to each other, leaving Ethan standing there alone. "Thank you," she said finally. "Just doing the right thing. Most people don't. Most people aren't desperate enough." She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw exhaustion in her face. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, then figured he had nothing left to lose. "I've got a 7-year-old son. His mom left when he was 2. I work 60 hours a week and still can't make rent half the time. And I came up here today because a group of guys offered me $500 to ask you out as a joke." Arya's eyes widened. "What?" "Yeah, that was the plan. Walk in, humiliate myself, take the money. But then I saw those blueprints, and I just couldn't." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, incredibly, she laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. "You're serious?" "Unfortunately." "And you chose this instead?" "I guess I did." Arya stood walking over to the window, looking out at the city. "You know Donovan's going to come after you. He's got connections, friends on the board. He'll make sure you never work in this industry again." "I figured. And you did it anyway. Like I said, I've got a kid. I can't let him grow up thinking it's okay to look the other way." She turned back to him, and something in her expression had changed. Softness, maybe even admiration. "What's your son's name?" "Dylan." "How old?" 7. "What's he like?" Ethan smiled despite himself. "Smart, too smart, loves dinosaurs, asks a million questions, drives me crazy." "Sounds like a good kid." "He is." Arya nodded slowly. Then she walked back to her desk, pulled out a business card, and handed it to him. "Call me tomorrow," she said. "We're going to fix this, all of it, and I'm going to need someone I can trust." Ethan took the card, staring at it. "Why me?" "Because you told the truth when it cost you everything. That's rare." He slipped the card into his pocket. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly." "I'm used to ugly." She smiled. "I believe you." Ethan left the building as the sun set, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. His phone buzzed. A text from the after-school program. Dylan was ready to be picked up. He climbed into his truck, hands still shaking, and sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. He'd walked into that office expecting humiliation, and instead, he'd started a war. But as he pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward his son, he realized something. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt alive. Dylan was waiting on the steps of the community center when Ethan pulled up, backpack hanging off one shoulder, sneakers untied. The kid had his mother's eyes, bright, curious, always looking for the next thing to figure out. He climbed into the truck and immediately started talking. "Dad, did you know that the T-Rex had teeth as big as bananas? I read it in a book today. Miss Rodriguez said I could take it home if I wanted, but I said no because Tommy wanted to read it, and I already know most of the stuff anyway. Can we get pizza for dinner? I'm starving." Ethan pulled back into traffic, half listening, his mind still spinning from the last 2 hours. "Yeah, buddy, pizza sounds good. Are you okay?" Ethan glanced over. Dylan was staring at him with that look he got sometimes, the one that made him seem older than 7. Wiser, somehow. "I'm fine. Just a long day." "You look worried." "I'm not worried." "You're doing the thing with your jaw. You always do that when you're worried." Ethan relaxed his face, realizing Dylan was right. "I had a tough conversation at work, but it's okay. Everything's okay." Dylan nodded, satisfied for now, and went back to talking about dinosaurs. Ethan let the words wash over him, grateful for the distraction. By the time they got home, a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and somebody's cooking, he'd almost convinced himself that maybe things would work out. They ate pizza on the couch, watching some nature documentary Dylan had picked out. Ethan's phone buzzed twice, but he ignored it. Whatever it was could wait. This was his time with his son, and nothing was going to take that away. After Dylan fell asleep, Ethan finally checked his phone. 2 missed calls from Jimmy Ortiz. 3 texts. "Call me." "Seriously? Call me." "Donovan's pissed. Watch your back." Ethan stared at the screen, his stomach sinking. He'd known this was coming, known it the second he opened his mouth in Arya Bennett's office. But seeing it spelled out like that made it real in a way he wasn't ready for. He called Jimmy. Jesus, Ethan, what the hell did you do? I told the truth. Yeah, well, the truth just got you fired. Donovan called the site manager 20 minutes ago. Said you're off the project effective immediately. No severance, no notice. Just gone. Ethan closed his eyes, leaning back against the couch. He can't do that. He just did. And he's telling everyone you falsified safety reports to make him look bad. Says you've got a grudge because he passed you over for a promotion last year. That's a lie. I know it's a lie. But Donovan's got friends, man. People who believe him. You need to get ahead of this before it spreads. How? Jimmy was quiet for a moment. I don't know, but you better figure it out fast. The line went dead. Ethan sat there in the dark, the only sound Dylan's soft breathing from the bedroom. He thought about Arya's card in his pocket, thought about calling her, but it was almost 10 at night and he'd already asked enough of her. He'd deal with it tomorrow. Morning came too fast. Ethan woke to Dylan shaking his shoulder, already dressed for school, asking if they had any cereal left. They didn't. Ethan made toast instead, spreading peanut butter thin because the jar was almost empty and payday was still a week away. Except there wasn't going to be a payday anymore. He drove Dylan to school, kissed him on the forehead, and watched him run toward the building, backpack bouncing. Then he sat in the truck, staring at Arya's business card. He dialed. She answered on the second ring. Ethan? Yeah, sorry to call so early. It's fine, I've been up since 5. What's wrong? Donovan fired me last night, and he's spreading a story that I'm the one who falsified the reports. Silence. Then, son of a bitch. I just thought you should know, in case it comes back on you. It won't come back on me. I'm handling this. Where are you right now? Sitting in my truck outside my son's school. Can you meet me at the Tower Zenith site in an hour? I'm not allowed on site anymore. You are if I say you are. 1 hour. She hung up before he could argue. The job site looked different in the morning light, quieter. Most of the crew hadn't arrived yet, just a few early risers setting up equipment and running through checklists. Ethan parked his truck near the temporary office trailer and waited. 5 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up, and Arya stepped out, wearing jeans and a blazer, hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked less like a CEO and more like someone ready to get her hands dirty. Walk me through it, she said without preamble. Ethan led her to the foundation trench, pointing out the areas where the concrete had already been poured. This section here, grid C7, was supposed to be 18 inches thick. What we've got is closer to 14. You can see the difference if you measure. Arya crouched down, studying the exposed concrete. How did this get approved? Donovan signed off on the change. The crew thought it was legit because his name was on the paperwork. And you noticed it how? I double-check everything. Learned it from my first foreman. He used to say, trust the plans but verify the work. I've been doing it ever since. Arya stood, brushing dust off her jeans. We need to bring in an independent inspector, someone who can't be bought. That's going to take time. I don't care. If we're going to prove Donovan cut corners, we need documentation, hard evidence. Ethan nodded. What do you want me to do? Stay close. I might need you to walk the inspector through what you found. Arya, he hesitated. People are going to ask why you're listening to me. A guy who just got fired. A guy with no credentials. She looked at him, and there was something fierce in her eyes. Let them ask. I don't answer to people who think credentials matter more than honesty. Before Ethan could respond, a voice cut through the air. Well, isn't this cozy? They turned. Marcus Donovan stood 20 feet away, flanked by 2 men in suits Ethan didn't recognize. Lawyers, probably. Donovan's face was calm, but his eyes were cold. Ms. Bennett, Donovan said smoothly, I wasn't aware you'd be visiting the site this morning. I don't need to announce my visits. Of course not. But I do need to inform you that Mr. Cole is no longer employed by this company. His presence here constitutes trespassing. He's here at my request. Donovan smiled thinly. With all due respect, that doesn't change the legal reality. He's been terminated for cause. If he refuses to leave, I'll have security remove him. Arya stepped forward, and Ethan saw something shift in her posture. She wasn't just the CEO anymore. She was a woman who'd spent her entire career fighting men like Donovan, and she was done being polite. "You want to talk about legal reality?" she said quietly. "Let's talk about the fact that you authorized substandard construction to save 2% on budget. Let's talk about the fact that you falsified safety reports. Let's talk about the fact that if this building fails, people die, and you're the one who signed off on it." Donovan's smile didn't waver. "Those are serious accusations. They're facts. Then I'm sure you have evidence to support them. I'm working on it. In the meantime, I suggest you be careful about making claims you can't prove. Defamation lawsuits are expensive. So are wrongful death suits." The two men stared at each other, and Ethan realized he was watching something bigger than just a fight over a construction project. This was about power, about control, about who got to decide what was acceptable and what wasn't. "Ethan," Arya said without looking away from Donovan, "go wait in my car." "Arya, go." Ethan hesitated, then walked toward the SUV. As he passed Donovan, the older man leaned in close. "You should have kept your mouth shut," Donovan murmured. "Now you're going to lose everything." Ethan kept walking. Arya joined him 10 minutes later, her jaw tight, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He's going to fight this," she said. "I know. He's got allies on the board, people who've worked with him for years. They're not going to believe you over him." "I know that too." She turned to him. "Then why did you do it?" Ethan thought about Dylan, about the toast that morning, about all the shortcuts he'd taken in his own life just to survive. And he realized that if he didn't stand up now, he'd never be able to look his son in the eye and tell him to do the right thing. "Because someone had to," he said simply. Arya studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, then we do this the hard way." Meh. The next 3 days were a nightmare. Ethan couldn't find work. Every call he made, every resume he sent came back with the same answer. "No openings. Budget cuts. We'll keep you on file." He knew what it really meant. Donovan had blacklisted him. One phone call from a senior VP, and suddenly every company in the city knew Ethan Cole was trouble. He started skipping meals to make sure Dylan had enough, started avoiding his landlord's calls because the rent was due and he didn't have it, started lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell he was going to pull them out of this. On the 4th day, Arya called. "I've got an inspector coming tomorrow morning. Can you be there?" "Yeah." "Ethan, are you okay? You sound—" "I'm fine." "You're not fine," he almost laughed. "What gave it away? When's the last time you ate?" "I don't know. Yesterday?" Silence. Then, "Where are you right now?" "Home." "Stay there. I'm coming over." "Arya, you don't have to—" She hung up. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on his door. Ethan opened it to find Arya standing there with 2 bags of groceries. "Let me in," she said. He stepped aside, suddenly aware of how small his apartment was, how worn the furniture looked, how the paint was peeling in the corner by the window. Arya didn't seem to notice. She walked straight to the kitchen and started unpacking. "You've got a kid," she said. "You can't starve yourself." "I'm not—" "Yes, you are. And it's stupid. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her move around his kitchen like she belonged there. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you did the right thing, and you're getting punished for it. And I'm not going to stand by and watch that happen." "You barely know me." She stopped, turning to face him. "I know enough." "What does that mean?" "It means I've spent the last 5 years surrounded by people who only care about themselves. People who smile to your face and stab you in the back the second it's convenient. And then you show up, covered in dust, risking everything to tell the truth, and I—" She shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe I just needed to remember that people like you still exist." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Arya finished unpacking the groceries, then pulled out her phone. "I'm ordering dinner. What is Dylan like?" "You don't have to—" "What is he like?" "Chicken nuggets, fries, anything with ketchup." She smiled. "Good taste." "What?" Dylan came home an hour later and stopped dead when he saw Arya sitting on the couch. "Who are you?" he asked bluntly. "Dylan?" Ethan said. "Manners." "It's okay," Arya said, standing. "I'm Arya. I work with your dad." Dylan studied her with the same intensity he brought to everything. "You're pretty." Arya laughed. "Thank you." Are you his girlfriend? Dylan. What? I'm just asking. Arya crouched down to Dylan's level. No, I'm not. But I am his friend. And I brought chicken nuggets. Dylan's eyes lit up. Really? Really? That was all it took. Dylan grabbed her hand and dragged her to the kitchen, talking a mile a minute about his day, his dinosaur book, his friend Tommy, who still couldn't tie his shoes even though they were in second grade. Ethan watched them, something tight loosening in his chest. Arya listened to every word Dylan said, asked questions, laughed at his jokes. She didn't talk down to him or check her phone or act like she had somewhere better to be. She was just there. After dinner, Dylan fell asleep on the couch, and Arya helped Ethan carry him to bed. He's a good kid, she said quietly. He's the best thing I've ever done. They walked back to the living room, and for the first time in days, Ethan felt like maybe things weren't completely falling apart. Tomorrow, Arya said. The inspector. We're going to prove Donovan lied, and then we're going to make sure he pays for it. And if we can't prove it, we will. You sound pretty sure. I am, because I've got you. Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd walked into his life 3 days ago and turned everything upside down, and realized something terrifying. He was starting to trust her. The inspector arrived at dawn, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Dr. Laura Chen. She had 2 assistants with her, both carrying equipment that looked expensive and complicated. Arya met them at the site, and Ethan stood off to the side, trying to stay out of the way. Dr. Chen worked methodically, measuring the concrete, taking core samples, running tests that Ethan didn't understand but trusted implicitly. Arya watched everything, asking questions, taking notes. Donovan showed up an hour into the inspection, flanked by his lawyers. This is harassment, one of the lawyers said. Dr. Chen didn't even look up. This is a structural integrity assessment. If you have a problem with it, take it up with the building commissioner. We will. Good luck with that. Donovan's face darkened, but he stayed quiet. Ethan watched him from across the site, saw the way the man's hands clenched and unclenched, saw the barely controlled rage simmering beneath the surface. 3 hours later, Dr. Chen finished. She pulled off her gloves, handed her equipment to an assistant, and turned to Arya. You were right, she said. The foundation is substandard, 14 inches instead of 18. Structural load calculations are compromised. If this building goes up as planned, you're looking at significant risk of failure under stress. Arya's face was calm, but Ethan saw relief flash through her eyes. Can you document that? Already done. I'll have the full report to you by tomorrow. Thank you. Dr. Chen glanced at Donovan. Whoever signed off on this should be prosecuted. She left. The lawyers left. And then it was just Arya, Ethan, and Donovan. You think you've won, Donovan said quietly. But you haven't. You've just made an enemy you can't afford. I've had worse, Arya said. Donovan turned to Ethan. And you're done. I'm going to make sure no one in this industry ever hires you again. You're going to spend the rest of your life scraping by, wondering why you couldn't just keep your mouth shut. Ethan stepped forward. You know what the difference is between you and me? Enlighten me. I can sleep at night. Donovan's jaw tightened. Then he turned and walked away, and Ethan knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Bam. That night, Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Ethan Cole? A woman's voice. Professional, cold. Yeah. This is Janet Winters from the State Licensing Board. We've received a complaint regarding your conduct on a recent construction project. We're opening an investigation. Ethan's stomach dropped. What kind of complaint? Falsifying safety reports. Negligence, endangering workers. If the allegations are substantiated, your contractor's license will be revoked. That's not... You'll receive formal notice within 3 business days. Have a good evening. She hung up. Ethan stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, and felt the world tilt. Donovan wasn't just trying to blacklist him. He was trying to destroy him completely. He called Arya. She answered immediately. They're coming after my license. What? He told her about the call. When he finished, she was quiet for so long he thought she'd hung up. Arya? I'm here. I'm just thinking. There's nothing to think about. I'm screwed. No, you're not. We have Dr. Chen's report. We have evidence that Donovan falsified the specs. We can fight this. How? He's got lawyers. I can barely afford rent. Then I'll pay for the lawyers. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Ethan sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. Why? Because you were right, and being right shouldn't cost you everything. It already has. Not yet it hasn't. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think there was a way out of this, but every instinct he had was screaming that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he should have just kept his head down, done his job, and let someone else be the hero. Ethan, Arya said softly, are you still there? Yeah. We're going to win this, I promise. You can't promise that. Watch me. The formal notice arrived 2 days later. Ethan read it 3 times, each word sinking in like a stone. They were accusing him of everything Donovan had actually done, twisting the facts until he looked like the villain, and unless he could prove otherwise, he was going to lose everything. He met Arya at a coffee shop downtown. She had a lawyer with her, a sharp-eyed man named Greg Torres, who looked like he'd been born in a courtroom. We can fight this, Greg said, flipping through the complaint. But it's going to get ugly. How ugly? Ethan asked. Depositions, testimony, cross-examination. Donovan's team is going to try to paint you as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. We need to be ready for that. I don't have an axe to grind. I just told the truth. I know, but juries don't always care about the truth. They care about the story. And right now, Donovan's got a better story. Ethan looked at Arya. This is going to cost you a fortune. I don't care. You should. Well, I don't. Greg cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Donovan's filing a defamation suit against both of you. He's claiming your accusations damaged his reputation and cost him business opportunities. Arya's face hardened. Let him. We'll countersue for fraud. That's risky. If you lose, we won't lose. Greg studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, then let's get to work. The next few weeks blurred together. Depositions, document reviews, endless meetings with lawyers who spoke in a language Ethan barely understood. He kept working odd jobs, handyman gigs, small repairs, anything that paid cash, but it wasn't enough. He fell behind on rent, got an eviction notice, started packing boxes because he didn't know where else he and Dylan were going to go. Arya found out and showed up at his door with a check. I can't take this, Ethan said. It's a loan. Arya? It's a loan. Pay me back when this is over. And if we lose, we won't. You keep saying that because it's true. He took the check, hated himself for it, but took it anyway. Man. 2 days before the hearing, Ethan got another call. This time, it was Jimmy Ortiz. You need to get to the site now. Why? Just get here. Ethan drove to Tower Zenith, his gut churning. When he arrived, he found Jimmy standing near the Foundation trench, staring at something Ethan couldn't see. What's going on? Jimmy pointed. Look. Ethan looked, and his blood ran cold. Cracks. Hairline fractures running through the concrete, spiderwebbing out from the center of grid C7. How long have those been there? Ethan asked. I noticed them this morning. Called the engineer. He says it's subsidence. The foundation's settling unevenly because it's not thick enough to support the load. Has anyone told Arya? I called her before I called you. She's on her way. Ethan crouched down, running his fingers along one of the cracks. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. And it was proof that Donovan's shortcuts had consequences. Proof that Ethan had been right all along. Arya arrived 20 minutes later, Dr. Chen right behind her. They examined the cracks, took photos, ran tests, and when Dr. Chen stood up, her face was grim. This is going to get worse, she said. If you don't shore up this foundation immediately, you're looking at catastrophic failure. Arya turned to Ethan. How fast can that happen? Depends on the load. If they keep building on top of this, days, maybe hours. Then we stop construction. The board won't like that. I don't care what the board likes. She pulled out her phone and made a call. Ethan couldn't hear what she said, but he saw the way her jaw set, the way her eyes narrowed, and he knew she was done playing nice. When she hung up, she looked at him. We're shutting it down, all of it, until this is fixed. Donovan's going to lose his mind. Good. Let him. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Ethan barely slept. He kept thinking about the cracks, about what could have happened if Jimmy hadn't noticed them, about all the ways this could still go wrong. But when he walked into that courtroom, Arya was already there, calm and composed, like she'd been born for this. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Donovan's lawyers argued that Ethan was a liar, that he'd fabricated evidence, that he was trying to sabotage the project out of spite. They painted him as unstable, desperate, someone who couldn't be trusted. And then Greg Torres stood up. He presented Dr. Chen's original report, the photos of the cracks, the engineering analysis showing that the foundation was failing exactly as Ethan had warned. He called witnesses, workers who'd seen Donovan pressure the crew, who'd heard him talk about cutting costs, who'd been told to ignore the specs. And then he called Ethan. Ethan sat in that witness box and told the truth, all of it, the dare, the blueprints, the moment he realized Donovan had lied. He didn't try to make himself sound like a hero. He just told it the way it happened. When he finished, the room was silent. The board deliberated for 20 minutes. When they came back, the lead investigator looked directly at Donovan. Based on the evidence presented, we find that Marcus Donovan knowingly authorized substandard construction in violation of safety regulations. His contractor's license is hereby revoked, and we are referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. Donovan's face went white. As for Mr. Cole, the investigator continued, all complaints against him are dismissed. His license remains active. Ethan exhaled, the weight of the last month lifting all at once. It was over. Outside the courthouse, Arya turned to him, and for the first time since they'd met, she looked tired. We did it, she said. You did it. We did it. Ethan smiled. Yeah, I guess we did. She stepped closer, and for a moment he thought she might hug him, but instead she just held out her hand. Thank you, she said, for not backing down. He shook her hand, feeling the warmth of her grip, the steadiness of it. Thank you for believing me, she smiled. Anytime. As they walked toward the parking lot, Ethan realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about what came next, about rebuilding, about figuring out who they were going to be on the other side of all this. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the answer. The week after the hearing felt strange. Ethan kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to call and tell him it had all been a mistake, that Donovan had found some loophole and everything was going back to the way it was. But the call never came. Instead, his phone rang with job offers. 3 different construction companies, all suddenly interested in hiring the guy who'd stood up to Marcus Donovan and won. He turned them all down, not because he didn't need the money, he did, desperately, but because Arya had asked him to wait. She had something else in mind, she'd said, something better. And after everything she'd done for him, the least he could do was trust her. Dylan noticed the change in him. Kids always did. One morning over cereal, the boy looked up and said, "You seem happier." Ethan paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. Yeah? Yeah, you're not doing the jaw thing anymore. The jaw thing. You know, where you look like you're trying to chew rocks. Ethan laughed despite himself. I wasn't aware I did that. You did it a lot, but not anymore. Dylan went back to his cereal, satisfied with his observation, and Ethan sat there wondering when his 7-year-old had gotten so perceptive. That afternoon, Arya called. Can you meet me at the office? There's something I want to show you. When? Now, if you can. Ethan dropped Dylan off at his friend Tommy's house. The kid's mom owed him a favor anyway, and drove downtown. The office building looked different now, less intimidating. He walked through the lobby like he had a right to be there, took the elevator to the 42nd floor, and found Arya waiting in the conference room. She wasn't alone. 3 other people sat around the table, 2 men and a woman, all wearing expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical. Arya gestured to an empty chair. Ethan, these are members of the board, Richard Hale, Susan Ortega, and James Chen. They wanted to meet you. Ethan shook their hands, feeling underdressed in his jeans and flannel shirt. Richard Hale was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of handshake that felt like a test. Susan Ortega looked like she'd spent her whole life in boardrooms, sharp, and assessing. James Chen seemed friendlier, offering a genuine smile. "Mr. Cole," Richard said, settling back into his chair. "We've heard a lot about you." "I imagine you have." "Arya tells us you saved this company from a potential disaster." Ethan glanced at Arya, who gave him a small nod. "I just pointed out a problem. She's the one who fixed it." Susan leaned forward. "The question is, what do we do now? Tower Zenith is shut down. We've got investors breathing down our necks asking when construction will resume. We need a plan." "We have one," Arya said. "We tear out the faulty foundation and rebuild it properly. It'll cost more and take longer, but it's the only way to ensure the building is safe." Richard frowned. "How much more are we talking? 3 million? Maybe 4? That's a significant overrun. It's cheaper than a lawsuit when the building collapses." James spoke up. "I agree with Arya. We can't cut corners on this, not after what happened with Donovan." Susan tapped her pen against the table. "And who's going to oversee the rebuild? We just fired our VP of operations. The engineering team is stretched thin as it is." Arya looked at Ethan. "That's why I asked Ethan here. I want to offer him a position." The room went quiet. Ethan blinked. "What?" "Director of Safety and Compliance. You'd oversee all construction projects, make sure they meet code, verify that no one's cutting corners. You'd report directly to me." Ethan's mind went blank. "I'm not qualified for that." "You found a structural flaw that 3 engineers and a VP missed. I'd say you're plenty qualified." "I don't have a degree. You have experience. You have integrity. That's worth more than a piece of paper." Richard cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Arya, this is highly irregular. We typically require—" "I don't care what we typically require," Arya said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Ethan saved this company. He risked everything to do the right thing, and now we're going to reward him for it. Unless you'd prefer to go back to the old way of doing things, where people like Donovan run the show and we all pretend not to notice when buildings start cracking." Richard held her gaze for a long moment, then he sighed. "What's the salary?" $120,000, plus benefits." Ethan's heart stopped. He'd never made more than $45,000 in his life. The number didn't even sound real. "That's more than some of our senior engineers make," Susan pointed out. "Then maybe we're underpaying our engineers." James laughed. "I like her style." Susan looked at Ethan. "What do you think, Mr. Cole? Are you up for this?" Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. His mind was racing, trying to catch up with what was happening. A real job. A salary that would mean Dylan could have new shoes when he needed them, that they could move out of that cramped apartment, that Ethan wouldn't have to choose between groceries and electricity. But it also meant responsibility. It meant people depending on him. It meant walking into rooms where he didn't belong and pretending he had a right to be there. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've never done anything like this before." "None of us have," Arya said. "Not really. We just pretend we know what we're doing until we figure it out." "That's supposed to be reassuring?" "It's supposed to be honest." Ethan looked around the table. Richard still looked skeptical. Susan looked calculating. James looked hopeful. And Arya looked like she believed in him, which was somehow the most terrifying part of all. "Okay," Ethan said. "I'll do it," Arya smiled. "Good. You start Monday." That night, Ethan picked Dylan up from Tommy's house and took him out for dinner. Not pizza from the place down the street, but an actual restaurant with menus and waiters and cloth napkins. Dylan's eyes went wide when they walked in. "Are we celebrating something?" the kid asked. "Yeah, I got a new job." "A good one?" "A really good one." Dylan grinned. "Does that mean we can get dessert?" "We can get whatever you want." They ordered burgers and fries, and Dylan talked nonstop about his day, about how Tommy's older brother had let them play video games, about how he'd beaten the hardest level twice. Ethan listened, soaking in every word, feeling something loosen in his chest that he hadn't even realized was tight. When dessert came, chocolate cake for Dylan, coffee for Ethan, the kid looked up at him with those 2 wise eyes. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy?" "Are things going to be okay now?" Ethan hesitated. He wanted to say yes, wanted to promise that everything would be perfect from here on out, but he'd learned the hard way that life didn't work like that. "I think so," he said. But even if they're not, we'll figure it out. We always do. Dylan nodded, satisfied, and went back to his cake. And Ethan sat there, watching his son, and thought maybe, just maybe, things really were going to be okay. Monday morning came too fast. Ethan stood outside the office building at 7:30, wearing the only suit he owned, a cheap thing he'd bought for his ex-wife's cousin's wedding 5 years ago. It didn't fit right anymore. Too tight in the shoulders, too loose in the waist, but it was all he had. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The receptionist recognized him this time and smiled. "Ms. Bennett is expecting you. Third door on the left." Ethan found the office. It was smaller than Arya's, but still nicer than anywhere he'd ever worked. A desk, a computer, a window overlooking the city. His name was already on the door. Ethan Cole, Director of Safety and Compliance. He stood there staring at it for a long moment. "You going to go in or just admire the sign all day?" He turned. Arya stood behind him holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up," she said. "You thought I'd bail. I thought you might get cold feet." "I did, about 50 times between yesterday and now." She smiled. "But you came anyway." "Yeah." "Good. Come on, I'll show you around." The next hour was a blur. Arya introduced him to the engineering team, the project managers, the safety inspectors. Some of them looked at him with curiosity, others with thinly veiled skepticism. One guy, an older engineer named Paul something, didn't even bother hiding his disdain. "So you're the new boss," Paul said, arms crossed. "The guy with no degree and no experience telling us how to do our jobs." "I'm not here to tell you how to do your jobs," Ethan said evenly. "I'm here to make sure the work gets done safely. We've been doing this for 20 years. We don't need some construction worker playing supervisor." "Paul," Arya said, her voice cold, "if you have a problem with my hiring decisions, you're welcome to submit your resignation. Otherwise, I suggest you show some respect." Paul's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just turned and walked away. When he was gone, Ethan let out a breath. That went well. He'll come around. Or he won't. Either way, don't let him get to you. Easy for you to say. It's not easy. It's just necessary. They spent the rest of the morning going over the Tower Zenith rebuild plan. The faulty foundation would be demolished and replaced. Every measurement would be triple-checked. Every decision would be documented. It was going to be slow, expensive, and exhausting. But it was going to be right. "When do we start?" Ethan asked. "Tomorrow. I want you on site every day. Eyes on everything." "What about the rest of my job?" "The rest of your job is making sure this doesn't happen again. Tower Zenith is ground zero. You prove you can fix this, and people will listen when you tell them how to fix everything else." "No pressure." She looked at him. "You can handle it." "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." The demolition started the next day. Ethan stood at the edge of the site, watching as heavy machinery tore into the faulty foundation. Each crash of concrete felt like a small victory, like proof that they were finally doing things the right way. Jimmy Ortiz walked over, hands in his pockets. "Hell of a thing, watching all that work get torn down." "Yeah." "You doing okay? I heard about the new job." "I'm figuring it out." Jimmy nodded. "For what it's worth, I think you'll be good at it. You've always cared more than the rest of us." "That's not true." "It is. Most guys just want to clock in and clock out. You actually give a damn. That's rare." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They stood there in silence, watching the demolition, and Ethan felt the weight of what he'd taken on settle onto his shoulders. This wasn't just about fixing one building. It was about changing the way things worked, about proving that you didn't have to cut corners to make money, that safety and profit didn't have to be enemies. It felt impossible. But then again, a month ago, standing up to Marcus Donovan had felt impossible too. The first real test came 2 weeks later. Ethan was reviewing supply orders when he noticed something off. The rebar specifications for the new foundation were listed at grade 40 steel instead of grade 60. It was a small difference, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, but it mattered. Grade 40 was cheaper, also weaker. He picked up the phone and called the supplier. "This is Ethan Cole, Director of Safety and Compliance. I'm looking at an order for Tower Zenith, reference number TZ447. Can you confirm the steel grade? The woman on the other end tapped at her keyboard. Showing grade 40, sir. That's wrong. It should be grade 60. Let me check the original requisition. A pause. The order was placed by Paul Hendricks. He specified grade 40. Ethan's jaw tightened. Paul. The same engineer who'd made it clear he didn't think Ethan belonged here. Cancel the order, Ethan said. I'll submit a revised requisition. Are you sure? Mr. Hendricks was pretty insistent. Cancel it. He hung up and went looking for Paul. Found him in the engineering bay, hunched over a set of plans. We need to talk, Ethan said. Paul didn't look up. I'm busy. I just canceled your rebar order. That got his attention. Paul straightened, eyes narrowing. Excuse me? You ordered grade 40 steel. We need grade 60. Grade 40 is sufficient for the load requirements. I ran the numbers. The specs call for grade 60. The specs are overly conservative. We can save $30,000 by using grade 40 without compromising structural integrity. Ethan stepped closer. This is exactly what Donovan did. Cut costs by shaving specs, and look how that turned out. Paul's face flushed. I am not Marcus Donovan. I know what I'm doing. Maybe you do, but I'm not taking that chance. You don't have the authority to override my engineering decisions. Actually, I do. Director of Safety and Compliance. That means if I think something's unsafe, it doesn't happen. Paul stood, anger radiating off him. You're making a mistake. You're going to blow the budget on unnecessary precautions. And when the board sees the overruns, they're going to come after you. Not me. You. Then I guess I better make sure I'm right. They stared at each other, and Ethan saw the calculation in Paul's eyes. The engineer was trying to decide if this was a fight worth having. Finally, Paul grabbed his jacket. Fine. Use grade 60. But when Arya asks why we're over budget, I'm telling her it's because you don't know the difference between cautious and paranoid. He walked out. Ethan stood there, heart pounding, wondering if he'd just made things better or worse. That night, Arya called him into her office. I heard about the rebar situation, she said. Ethan braced himself. Yeah. Paul's upset. I noticed. He thinks you're undermining him. I'm doing my job. Arya leaned back in her chair, studying him. Do you trust his calculations? I don't know him well enough to trust him. And after Donovan, I'm not taking anyone's word for it. So what do you want to do? Get a third-party engineer to review the load requirements. If they say grade 40 is safe, I'll back down. If they say we need grade 60, Paul needs to accept it. Arya nodded slowly. Okay, I'll set it up. You're not mad? Why would I be mad? Because I'm causing problems, making things more expensive. You're doing exactly what I hired you to do. She paused. Ethan, you need to understand something. People like Paul have been working in this industry for decades. They're used to being the smartest person in the room, and now you're here, questioning their decisions, and they don't like it. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. What if I am wrong? Then we'll deal with it. But I'd rather deal with being too careful than not careful enough. Ethan nodded, feeling some of the tension ease. Thanks. Don't thank me yet. This is only going to get harder. She wasn't wrong. The third-party engineer came back 2 days later with a report confirming that grade 60 steel was necessary given the building's height and the soil conditions. Paul didn't apologize, but he stopped arguing, and word spread through the office that the new director of safety and compliance wasn't someone you could push around. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it just felt exhausting. A month into the job, Ethan was working late when Arya knocked on his door. You're still here, she said. So are you. I live here. What's your excuse? Ethan gestured at the stack of reports on his desk. Trying to get caught up. Arya walked in, closing the door behind her. You're doing too much. There's a lot to do. There's always a lot to do. That doesn't mean you have to do all of it in one night. I don't want to screw this up. You won't. You can't know that. She pulled up a chair, sitting across from him. You're right. I can't. But I know you're not going to screw it up because you don't care enough. If anything, you care too much. Ethan rubbed his eyes. I've got people depending on me. Dylan, the crew, you. I can't afford to mess this up. You're putting too much pressure on yourself. That's kind of the job, isn't it? Arya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, when I first became CEO, I thought I had to be perfect. Thought I couldn't show weakness or doubt or any sign that I didn't have all the answers. And I burned out in 6 months. Ended up in the ER with what I thought was a heart attack, but turned out to be a panic attack. Ethan looked at her, surprised. I didn't know that. No one does. I kept it quiet. But my point is, you can't do this alone. You have a team. Use them. I don't know how. Start by going home, getting some sleep, spending time with your kid. The work will still be here tomorrow. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to say he couldn't afford to slow down, that there was too much at stake. But the truth was, he was tired, bone-deep tired. And Arya was right. Dylan had asked him that morning when they were going to have another movie night, and Ethan had said soon, but soon kept getting pushed back. Okay, he said. I'll go home. Arya smiled. Good. And Ethan? Yeah? You're doing a great job. I mean that. He looked at her, this woman who'd given him a chance when no one else would, and felt something shift in his chest, something warm and terrifying and completely inappropriate given that she was his boss. Thanks, he managed. She stood, heading for the door. See you tomorrow. Yeah, see you. When she was gone, Ethan sat there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, and wondered what the hell he was doing. 3 days later, disaster struck. Not at Tower Zenith, but at another project across town, a mid-rise office building called Meridian Plaza. Ethan got the call at 6 in the morning. This is Ethan. Mr. Cole, this is Site Supervisor Rodriguez from Meridian Plaza. We've got a problem. One of the support beams shifted overnight. The whole 3rd floor is compromised. Ethan was out of bed before Rodriguez finished the sentence. Anyone hurt? No, we hadn't started work yet. But if we had, don't let anyone on that floor. I'm on my way. He threw on clothes, called Arya, and drove across town with his hazards on. When he got to the site, Rodriguez was waiting, looking pale. Show me, Ethan said. They climbed to the 3rd floor. The beam in question was a massive steel I-beam that ran the length of the floor, supporting the weight above. And it had shifted. Not much, maybe 2 inches, but enough that the connections had pulled loose. If it gave way completely, the entire floor could collapse. How did this happen? Ethan asked. I don't know. It was fine yesterday. Ethan knelt, examining the connection points. And that's when he saw it. The bolts were the wrong size, too small to support the load. Someone had cut corners. Who installed this beam? Rodriguez pulled out his phone, checking the logs. Subcontractor, company called Apex Steel. Get me their contact information and get everyone off this site now. By the time Arya arrived, Ethan had already called the city inspector and started documenting everything. She took one look at the beam and her face went hard. This is unacceptable. It's criminal, Ethan said. If we'd started work this morning, people could have died. Who approved Apex Steel? I'm checking now. He pulled up the contract files on his phone. And there it was. Apex Steel had been approved 3 months ago by Donovan, Arya said, reading over his shoulder. He approved them right before he was fired. Arya's jaw tightened. He must have known they cut corners, probably got a kickback for using them. What do? We fire them, sue them, and make sure every other project they worked on gets inspected immediately. The city inspector arrived an hour later. He took one look at the beam and shut down the entire site. The next week was chaos. Inspections, meetings, press inquiries. Meridian Plaza became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the industry, and Ethan found himself at the center of it. But this time, he wasn't alone. Arya stood beside him at every press conference, every meeting, backing him up. And slowly, the narrative shifted. This wasn't about a failure. It was about catching a problem before it became a tragedy. 2 weeks after Meridian Plaza, Ethan was sitting in his office when there was a knock. He looked up to find Paul Hendricks standing in the doorway. Got a minute? Paul asked. Sure. Paul came in, closing the door. He looked uncomfortable. I owe you an apology. Ethan blinked. What? The rebar thing. You were right to question it. And Meridian Plaza. If you hadn't been paying attention, people could have died. I was wrong about you. Paul, let me finish. I've been doing this job for 25 years, and somewhere along the way I forgot that the point isn't just to build things. It's to build them right. You reminded me of that, so thank you. He held out his hand. Ethan shook it. I'm still figuring this out, Ethan said. I'm going to make mistakes. We all do. The difference is whether we learn from them. After Paul left, Ethan sat there feeling like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to get the hang of this. Vamos. That weekend, Ethan took Dylan to the park. They'd been planning it for weeks, and he'd almost canceled twice because of work. But he'd promised. And he was done breaking promises. They flew a kite, a cheap thing from the dollar store that kept nosediving, and ate ice cream and talked about nothing important. And for the first time in months, Ethan felt like he could breathe. Dad, Dylan said as they walked back to the truck. Yeah? I'm proud of you. Ethan stopped. What? Tommy's mom says you're a hero, that you saved people. I'm not a hero, buddy. She says you are, and I think so too. Ethan knelt down, looking his son in the eye. You know what makes someone a hero? What? Doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when it costs you. And if that's the definition, then you're a hero too. I am? Yeah. You're brave and kind, and you make me want to be better. So yeah, you're my hero. Dylan threw his arms around Ethan's neck, and Ethan held him tight, feeling tears prick at his eyes. They drove home as the sun set, and Ethan thought about everything that had happened. The dare, the hearing, the new job, Meridian Plaza, all of it. And he realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving, he was building something. The storm rolled in on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after Meridian Plaza. Ethan was at Tower Zenith, watching the crew pour the new foundation when the first drops of rain hit. Within minutes, it turned into a downpour, the kind that made the whole world go gray and blurry. Everyone off the site, he called out. We'll resume when this clears. The crew didn't argue. They packed up quickly, heading for their trucks and the temporary shelter by the office trailer. Ethan stayed behind for a moment, watching the rain hammer against the fresh concrete, making sure the tarps were holding. His phone buzzed. Aria. Where are you? Still at the site, just checking the... Get out of there. Weather Service just issued a severe storm warning. High winds, possible flooding. I'm almost done. Ethan, I'm not asking. Leave. Now. He heard something in her voice he hadn't heard before. Fear. Not for the project. For him. Okay, I'm going. He jogged toward his truck, rain soaking through his jacket, his boots squelching in the mud. The wind was picking up, turning the rain horizontal. He could hear metal creaking somewhere, something loose banging against something else. He should have secured it before the storm hit, should have done a better check. He was halfway to the truck when he heard it. A groan, deep and mechanical, the kind of sound that meant something heavy was about to move in a way it shouldn't. Ethan turned. The crane. The massive tower crane they'd been using to lift steel beams into place. It stood at the far end of the site, a skeletal giant against the storm-dark sky, and it was swaying, not much, just a slight tilt, but enough. His stomach dropped. The crane was supposed to be locked down, the base secured with counterweights and anchors, but in the rain and the wind something had come loose, and if it fell... There were still 3 workers near the base, securing equipment, too focused on their own tasks to notice what was happening above them. Hey! Ethan shouted, running toward them. Get away from there! They looked up, confused. One of them waved, thinking he was just being paranoid. The crane groaned again, louder this time, and Ethan saw the base shift, saw the counterweight slide, saw the whole structure tip another inch. Move! He screamed. This time they heard him, heard the panic in his voice. They looked up, saw the crane tilting, and ran. 2 of them made it clear. The third, a young guy Ethan recognized but didn't know by name, tripped, went down hard in the mud. The crane tipped farther. Metal screeched. Cables snapped with sounds like gunshots. Ethan didn't think. He just ran. Grabbed the kid by the back of his jacket and hauled him up, half dragging him away from the crane. They were 10 feet clear when the whole thing started to come down. But it didn't fall cleanly. The base caught on something, twisted, and the arm swung wide, tearing through the site like a massive pendulum. It clipped the edge of the foundation, sending chunks of concrete flying, smashed through the temporary scaffolding, headed straight for the office trailer where the rest of the crew had taken shelter. "Get out!" Ethan yelled, waving his arms. "Everyone out of the trailer!" Faces appeared in his windows. Someone opened the door. But they weren't moving fast enough. The crane arm was swinging toward them, and in another 3 seconds, it was going to crush the trailer like a tin can. Ethan let go of the kid he'd just saved and sprinted toward the crane base. There had to be a manual release, some way to drop the counterweights and stop the swing. He'd seen it during the safety briefing, but that was months ago, and he couldn't remember where. There. A red lever near the base, half hidden by the operator's cage. He climbed up, rain blinding him, wind trying to tear him off. His fingers found the lever. He pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled harder, throwing his whole weight into it. The lever moved an inch, 2 inches. And then it gave, slamming down with a metallic clang. The counterweights dropped. The crane arm jerked to a stop mid-swing, 10 feet from the trailer. For a moment, everything hung in perfect, terrible balance. And then the whole structure collapsed in on itself, falling away from the buildings, crashing into the empty part of the site with a sound like the end of the world. Ethan clung to the operator's cage, ears ringing, heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The rain kept falling, the wind kept howling, and somehow he was still alive. He climbed down on shaking legs. The crew was spilling out of the trailer, staring at the wreckage. The young kid he'd pulled from the mud stood nearby, looking shell-shocked. "You okay?" Ethan asked him. The kid nodded, unable to speak. Jimmy Ortiz appeared, face pale. "What the hell just happened?" "Crane wasn't secured properly. Storm caught it. You stopped it." "I got lucky." "Lucky? You climbed up there in the middle of a goddamn hurricane." "It's not a hurricane." "And pulled the emergency release with that thing swinging like a wrecking ball. That's not luck. That's—" Jimmy shook his head. "I don't even know what that is." Ethan's phone buzzed. Arya again. He answered. "Are you out of there?" "Yeah, I'm okay. What was that noise?" "The crane collapsed." Silence. Then, "Are you hurt?" "No." "Is anyone hurt?" "No. Everyone's fine." He heard her exhale, a sound that was almost a sob. "I'm coming down there." "Arya, the roads are flooded." "I don't care. I'm coming." She hung up. Ethan stood there in the rain, looking at the twisted wreckage of the crane, at the crew gathering around it, at the foundation that had almost been destroyed, and felt the adrenaline start to drain away. His hands were shaking. His legs felt like water. "Boss," Jimmy said, "you should sit down." "I'm fine." "You're about to fall over." Ethan let Jimmy guide him to a stack of lumber under the trailer's overhang. He sat, head between his knees, trying to breathe. The crew kept working around him, securing what could be secured, making sure no one else was in danger. And Ethan just sat there, replaying the last 10 minutes over and over in his head. If he'd left when Arya told him to, if he'd been 30 seconds slower, if that lever hadn't worked. Here, he looked up. One of the workers, an older woman named Rosa, who ran the concrete crew, was holding out a bottle of water. "Thanks." "You saved Miguel's life," she said. "That kid you pulled out of the way. He's my nephew." "I just... don't." Her voice was firm. "Don't downplay it. You risked your life for him, for all of us. That means something." She walked away before he could respond. Ethan drank the water, tasting rain and concrete dust, and wondered when he'd become the kind of person who ran toward danger instead of away from it. 1. Arya arrived 40 minutes later, driving a company SUV through flooded streets that should have been impassable. She jumped out before the engine even stopped, soaking wet, and marched straight to Ethan. "Are you hurt?" she demanded. "I'm fine." She grabbed his face, turning it left and right, checking for injuries. "You're bleeding." "What?" She touched his forehead, and her fingers came away red. He hadn't even noticed. Must have happened when he climbed the crane. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." "Arya, we've got bigger problems. The crane—" "I don't care about the crane. I care about you." The words hung between them, raw and unexpected. Ethan stared at her, and she stared back, and something shifted. Something that had been building for months, since that first day in her office, since every late night and every argument and every moment they'd fought side by side against people who wanted to tear them down. "I'm okay." he said quietly. Really? She didn't let go of his face. You can't do that again. Do what? Risk yourself like that. You have a son. You have... She stopped, swallowing hard. You have people who need you. The crew needed me more. That's not the point. Then what is the point? The point is you matter. And you keep acting like you're disposable, and you're not. Jimmy appeared, tactfully clearing his throat. Boss? City inspector's here, wants to talk to you about what happened. Arya stepped back, letting her hands drop. Go, we'll talk later. Ethan stood, his legs steadier now, and walked over to meet the inspector. The next 2 hours were a blur of questions, documentation, photographs. The inspector was thorough, asking about the crane's maintenance logs, who'd done the last safety check, whether proper protocols had been followed. Ethan answered everything honestly, because that's what he did now, even when honesty made things harder. By the time the inspector left, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The crew had cleared out, heading home to dry clothes and hot showers. Only Arya and Ethan remained, standing in the mud, looking at the wreckage. How bad is it? Arya asked. The crane's totaled. We'll need to bring in a new one. That's going to cost... I don't care what it costs. Can we salvage the foundation? Ethan walked over, examining the damage. The crane arm had clipped the edge, but the concrete was still curing. He couldn't tell how deep the damage went without proper testing. We'll need to bring in engineers, do ultrasound testing, figure out if the structure's compromised. And if it is, we start over. Arya closed her eyes. The board is going to lose their minds. Then let them. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. She opened her eyes, looking at him. You know what I like about you? What? You never compromise. Not when it matters. Neither do you. Yeah, but I'm supposed to be difficult. It's part of the job description. You're just... She shook her head. You're just you, and that's enough. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They stood there in the rain-soaked quiet, and for the first time since the crane fell, he let himself feel scared. Not of the crane, of this, whatever this was becoming between them. Chebd. The engineers came the next day. They spent 2 days testing the foundation, running equipment over every inch, looking for cracks and weaknesses. Ethan barely slept, waiting for the results. When the report finally came back, he read it 3 times to make sure he understood. The foundation was sound. The crane had damaged the surface layer, but the structural integrity was intact. They could continue. He called Arya immediately. We're okay, he said. The foundation's good. He heard her exhale. Thank God. We'll need to patch the surface damage, but the core structure is solid. How long will that take? A week, maybe 2? And the crane replacement? Already working on it. Should have a new one on site by next Monday. You're amazing. You know that? Ethan felt heat rise in his face. I'm just doing my job. You're doing more than that. You're rebuilding this company. We're rebuilding it. Yeah, she said softly. We are. After they hung up, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the report, feeling something unwind in his chest. They were going to make it. Despite Donovan, despite the storm, despite every obstacle that had been thrown at them, they were going to finish Tower Zenith the right way. That weekend, Ethan took Dylan to the site. It was Saturday, no crew working, just empty concrete and silent machinery. He wanted his son to see what he was building, not just the structure, but the idea behind it. Wow, Dylan said, staring up at the skeletal framework. It's huge. It's going to be even bigger when it's done. 40 stories. That's taller than our apartment building. A lot taller. They walked around the foundation, Dylan asking a million questions, and Ethan answered every one. Explained what rebar did, why concrete took so long to cure, how you calculated load-bearing capacity. The kid probably didn't understand half of it, but he listened anyway, eyes bright with curiosity. Dad, Dylan said as they stood at the edge of the foundation, is this where the crane fell? Ethan looked at the patched section. Yeah. Were you scared? He thought about lying, thought about being the strong, fearless dad his son probably wanted. But that wasn't who he was, and he'd promised himself he'd never lie to Dylan about the things that mattered. Yeah, he said. I was terrified. But you did it anyway. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. That's what you told me when I didn't want to apologize to Tommy for breaking his toy. Ethan smiled despite himself. I guess I did say that. So you chose to be brave. I chose to do the right thing. There's a difference. What's the difference? Being brave means you're not scared. Doing the right thing means you're scared, but you do it anyway. Dylan thought about that for a moment. Then he slipped his hand into Ethan's. I'm glad you did it, even if it was scary. Me too, buddy. Me too. Monday morning, Ethan arrived at the office to find Arya waiting outside his door. She looked nervous, which was rare. Arya didn't do nervous. We need to talk, she said. Okay. She followed him into his office, closing the door. The board met yesterday. They reviewed the Tower Zenith incident. Ethan's stomach tightened. And? They want to recognize you, publicly. There's going to be a press conference on Wednesday. They're calling you a hero. I'm not a hero. You saved 5 lives. That makes you a hero. I was just doing what anyone would have done. No, you were doing what you do, which is refusing to accept anything less than right. She paused. There's something else. What? They want to promote you, VP of Safety and Operations. Ethan blinked. What? It's a board-level position. You'd oversee all construction projects across the company. Not just Tower Zenith, everything. Arya, I've been in this job for 3 months. And in those 3 months, you've caught more safety violations than the last 3 directors combined. You stopped Meridian Plaza from becoming a disaster. You saved lives when that crane collapsed. The board sees what I see. You're the right person for this. Ethan sat down heavily. I don't know if I can do that. Why not? Because I'm still figuring out the job I have now. Because people like Paul barely respect me as it is. Because... He stopped, running his hands through his hair. Because I'm scared I'm going to screw it up. Arya pulled up a chair, sitting across from him. You want to know what I think? Not really. She smiled. I think you're scared because you care. And that's exactly why you should take this job. Because the people who don't care, they're the ones who screw things up. What if I fail? Then you fail. But at least you'll fail trying to do something good. Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd changed his entire life in the space of 4 months, and realized he trusted her more than he'd ever trusted anyone. Okay, he said. I'll do it. Her face lit up. Really? Really. She stood, and for a moment he thought she was going to hug him. Instead, she held out her hand. Welcome to the executive team. He shook it, feeling the warmth of her grip, the steadiness of it. And he thought maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe he could actually pull this off. The press conference was a nightmare. Ethan stood on a small stage in the company's main conference room, cameras pointed at him, reporters shouting questions, while Arya stood beside him and the board members sat in the front row looking pleased with themselves. Richard Hale gave a speech about courage and integrity. Susan Ortega talked about the company's commitment to safety. And then they called Ethan up to the microphone. I'm not good at speeches, he started, and the room laughed. But I want to say something about what happened at Tower Zenith. I didn't climb that crane because I'm brave or special. I did it because people were in danger and I had the ability to help. That's not heroism. That's just being human. He paused, looking out at the crowd. The real heroes are the people who show up every day and do their jobs right. The engineers who triple-check their calculations. The construction workers who refuse to cut corners even when it would save time. The inspectors who don't look the other way. Those are the people keeping buildings from falling down. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. More questions. More photos. And then it was over and Ethan could finally escape to the quiet of his office. Arya followed him. That was good. That was terrible. You were honest. People respect that. People respect results. We haven't rebuilt Tower Zenith yet. We will. He turned to face her. You're awfully confident for someone whose company almost had a crane fall on its crew. I'm confident because I have you. There it was again. That look. That shift in the air between them that made Ethan's chest tight and his thoughts scattered. Arya, I know, she said quickly. I know what you're going to say. That this is complicated. That I'm your boss. That we should keep things professional. Yeah, that. And you're right, we should. She took a step closer. But I'm tired of pretending I don't care about you. I'm tired of acting like you're just another employee when you're... She stopped, searching for words. When you're the first person in years who's made me remember why I wanted to do this job in the first place. Ethan's throat went dry. This is a bad idea. Probably. You could lose everything if this goes wrong. I could lose everything if I don't try. They stood there, inches apart, and Ethan felt the weight of every reason why this was a terrible, reckless, utterly stupid decision. And then he thought about Dylan asking him about being brave, about choosing to do things even when they scared you. I have a kid, he said. He comes first, always. I know. And I don't have time for games. If we do this, whatever this is, it has to be real. I don't know how to do anything that isn't real. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the CEO facade to the woman underneath, the one who worked until midnight, who fought for what was right, who'd risked her career to back him up when no one else would. Okay, he said. Okay? Yeah. Let's see where this goes. She smiled, not the polished, professional smile she wore in meetings. A real one, the kind that made her look younger and more alive. We're probably going to regret this, she said. Probably. But we're doing it anyway. Apparently. She laughed, and the sound filled something in Ethan that he hadn't realized was empty. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt like maybe, just maybe, good things were allowed to happen to him. The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful and occasionally terrifying. Ethan settled into his new role as VP, which meant bigger meetings, more responsibility, and a salary that still didn't feel real. He hired 2 assistant directors to help manage the workload, both of them former construction workers who understood the ground-level reality of the job. Tower Zenith progressed steadily. The new crane arrived. The foundation work wrapped up. Steel beams started going up, transforming the site from a hole in the ground to something that looked like it might actually become a building. And through it all, Arya was there. Not hovering, not micromanaging, just present. They had lunch together when their schedules allowed. Stayed late working on project reviews. Texted about nothing important and everything at once. They kept it quiet. Professional in public. But in private, in those stolen moments between meetings, something was growing. Something that felt fragile and dangerous and impossibly right. Dylan noticed, of course. Kids always did. You smile more now, he said one night over dinner. Do I? Yeah, is it because of work? Partly. What's the other part? Ethan hesitated. He hadn't told Dylan about Arya, hadn't known how, but lying felt wrong. I met someone, he said carefully. Someone I like. Dylan's eyes went wide. Like a girlfriend? Maybe. It's complicated. Is it Arya? Ethan nearly dropped his fork. How did you... She looks at you the way you look at her, and you both get weird when you talk about each other. We do not get weird. You totally do. Dylan grinned. I like her. She's nice, and she brought us chicken nuggets. That's your criteria? Chicken nuggets? It's good criteria. Ethan laughed, feeling some of the tension ease. Yeah, I guess it is. The turning point came on a Thursday evening. Ethan was at the Tower Zenith site, doing a final walkthrough before the weekend when his phone rang. Unknown number. This is Ethan. Mr. Cole, this is Detective Sarah Mitchell with the District Attorney's Office. We're investigating the fraud case against Marcus Donovan. I need to ask you some questions. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Okay. Can you come to our office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m.? Yeah, I'll be there. He hung up and called Arya immediately. The DA wants to talk to me about Donovan. When? Tomorrow morning. I'm coming with you. Arya, you don't have to I'm coming. This involves both of us. The DA's office was downtown in a gray building that smelled like old coffee and stale air. Detective Mitchell was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She led them to a conference room where another man waited, a prosecutor named David Chen. Thank you for coming, Chen said. We're building a case against Marcus Donovan for fraud, reckless endangerment, and corruption. Your testimony will be crucial. What do you need from me? Ethan asked. Everything. From the moment you noticed the foundation discrepancies to the crane incident. We need a clear timeline, documentation, and your professional opinion on the risks involved. For the next 3 hours, Ethan walked them through it all, showed them the original blueprints versus the altered ones, explained the load calculations, described finding the cracks in the foundation. By the time he finished, both Mitchell and Chen looked grim. "This is worse than we thought," Chen said. "If that building had gone up with the faulty foundation, it would have failed eventually," Ethan said. "Maybe in 5 years, maybe 10, but it would have failed, and people would have died." "Yeah." Mitchell leaned forward. "Donovan's lawyers are going to argue that these were judgment calls, not criminal acts. They'll say he was trying to keep the project on budget." "That's not a judgment call," Arya said sharply. "That's choosing profit over safety." "I agree, but we need to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, which means we need Ethan to testify." Ethan nodded. "Whatever you need. It won't be easy. Donovan's defense team is going to come after your credibility. They'll bring up the fact that you were fired, that you have a history with him. They'll try to make you look like you had an axe to grind." "Let them try." Chen smiled slightly. "You're more confident than most witnesses." "I'm not confident. I'm just tired of people like Donovan getting away with this." The trial was set for 2 months out. In the meantime, Ethan focused on work, on Dylan, on trying to build something resembling a normal life. Tower Zenith kept rising, floor by floor, a testament to doing things the right way even when it cost more and took longer. And his relationship with Arya deepened. They went on their first real date, dinner at a quiet restaurant where no one from the company would see them. Talked about everything except work. She told him about growing up in a family that expected her to be perfect, about fighting her way through business school, about the loneliness of being the youngest CEO the company had ever had. He told her about Dylan's mother leaving, about the years of barely scraping by, about the fear that he was failing his son every single day. "You're not failing him," Arya said. "You're showing him what it means to have integrity. I'm showing him what it means to struggle." Same thing sometimes. Their second date was at a park, flying kites with Dylan. Their third was a movie. Some animated thing Dylan picked that neither of them really watched because they were too busy stealing glances at each other in the dark. It wasn't perfect. Ethan still worried about the power dynamic, about what people would say, about whether this was fair to Dylan. But it was real, and that was enough. Otem. The night before the trial, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, going over his testimony in his head. Arya had offered to stay over just to keep him company, she said, but he'd declined. He needed to do this on his own. At 2 a.m., his phone buzzed, a text from Arya. "You're going to do great tomorrow. I believe in you." He typed back. "Thanks. I'm terrified." "Good. Means you care. Is that your answer for everything? It's worked so far." He smiled in the dark. "Get some sleep. One of us should be functional tomorrow. Good night, Ethan." "Good night." He set the phone down and closed his eyes. And somehow, impossibly, he slept. The courtroom was smaller than he expected, packed with people, reporters, company employees, curious onlookers. Donovan sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking calm and confident. His lawyers looked the same. Ethan took the stand, swore to tell the truth, and faced the prosecutor. David Chen walked him through the timeline, the blueprints, the foundation, the cracks, the crane. Ethan answered every question clearly, sticking to the facts, refusing to let emotion creep in. Then came cross-examination. Donovan's lawyer was a man named Robert Sterling, all silver hair and smooth confidence. He smiled like a shark. "Mr. Cole, isn't it true that you were fired from your position at Tower Zenith?" "Yes." "And isn't it true that you held a grudge against Mr. Donovan because of that termination?" "No." "No? You expect this court to believe that being fired didn't bother you?" "It bothered me. But I didn't hold a grudge. I told the truth, and he didn't like it." Sterling's smile widened. "The truth. Let's talk about that. You claim Mr. Donovan altered the foundation specifications, but you're not an engineer, are you?" "No." "You don't have a degree in structural engineering?" "No." "So how can you possibly know?" Because I've been working construction for 15 years, Ethan said, his voice steady. I know how to read blueprints. I know what proper load-bearing requirements look like. And I know when someone's cutting corners to save money. That's speculation. It's experience. Sterling pulled out a document. According to this report from Mr. Donovan's engineering team, the foundation specifications were within acceptable parameters. That report is wrong. Or your assessment is wrong. Ethan looked directly at Donovan. The foundation cracked. We have photographic evidence. We have third-party engineering reports confirming the structural inadequacy. The only person who's wrong here is him. The courtroom murmured. The judge called for order. Sterling tried a few more angles, questioned Ethan's motives, his expertise, his relationship with Arya, but nothing stuck. Because Ethan wasn't lying, and the truth, it turned out, was a lot harder to discredit than he'd feared. When he finally stepped down, Arya was waiting in the hallway. You were amazing, she said. I was honest. Same thing. They stood there, not touching, too many people around, but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating off her. What happens now? He asked. Now we wait for the verdict. And if he wins? He won't. You can't know that. She looked at him, and there was something fierce in her eyes. Yes, I can, because the truth matters, and for once, the truth is on our side. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 days of Ethan checking his phone every 5 minutes, pacing his office, barely sleeping. Dylan asked him twice if he was okay, and both times Ethan lied and said yes. Because what else could he say? That he was waiting to find out if a man who'd tried to destroy him would finally face consequences? That didn't seem like the kind of thing you told a 7-year-old. On the 3rd day, his phone rang. David Chen. We have a verdict. Ethan's heart stopped. And? Be at the courthouse in an hour. They're reading it then. Ethan called Arya. She was already on her way. The courtroom was packed again, maybe even more than before. Ethan sat in the gallery, Arya beside him, their hands almost touching on the wooden bench. He could see Donovan at the defense table, still looking calm, still wearing that same expensive suit. The man's confidence was either genuine or the best acting Ethan had ever seen. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The jury filed in, 12 faces that gave away nothing. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor. The foreman stood holding a piece of paper that would determine everything. Ethan's mouth went dry. On the count of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but the noise continued. Ethan sat frozen, the word echoing in his head. Guilty. On the count of reckless endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of corruption, we find the defendant guilty. 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 Donovan's face went pale. His lawyers started talking urgently, but Ethan couldn't hear what they were saying over the blood rushing in his ears. He felt Arya's hand find his, squeeze tight, and he squeezed back, barely able to process what had just happened. They'd won. After everything, the threats, the blacklisting, the lies, they'd actually won. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks out and adjourned. People started filing out, reporters shouting questions, but Ethan just sat there, unable to move. Ethan? Arya said softly. I can't believe it. Believe it. It's over. He turned to her and she was smiling, tears in her eyes. And before he could think about whether it was appropriate, whether anyone was watching, he pulled her into a hug. She held him tight, and for a moment the whole world narrowed to just the two of them. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For believing me. For fighting with me. For everything. She pulled back, looking at him. You did this. Not me. We did this. She nodded. Yeah, we did. The news spread fast. By that evening, every major outlet was running the story. CEO's whistleblower vindicated. Construction executive convicted of fraud. Tower Zenith scandal ends in justice. Ethan's phone didn't stop buzzing. Calls from reporters, from old coworkers, from people he hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanting to congratulate him. He ignored most of them. But there was one call he answered. Ethan Cole? A woman's voice, professional but warm. Yeah, this is Michelle Ramirez from the National Construction Safety Board. We've been following your case. I wanted to personally thank you for your testimony. What you did, exposing those violations. It's going to change how we approach oversight in this industry. I just told the truth, and that's exactly what we need more people to do, which is why I'm calling. We're putting together a task force to review safety protocols nationwide. We'd like you to be part of it. Ethan almost laughed. 6 months ago, he'd been getting fired. Now he was being asked to help reshape industry standards. I don't know if I'm qualified. You found flaws that trained engineers missed. You risked everything to make sure people were safe. That's exactly the kind of perspective we need. Think about it. No pressure, but we'd be honored to have you. She gave him her contact information and hung up. Ethan sat there, phone still in his hand, trying to wrap his head around how much his life had changed. Dylan wandered in, wearing pajamas with dinosaurs on them. Was that about the trial? Sort of. Did you win? Ethan smiled. Yeah, buddy, we won. Dylan threw his arms around Ethan's waist. I knew you would. You always do the right thing. I try. And trying is enough. That's what you told me. Ethan held his son, feeling something tight and painful loosen in his chest. Because Dylan was right. Trying was enough. You didn't have to be perfect. You didn't have to have all the answers. You just had to keep showing up, keep trying, keep choosing what was right, even when it cost you. Sentencing came on a cold morning in early November. Ethan didn't attend. He'd said everything he needed to say during the trial. But Arya went and called him afterward. 7 years, she said, plus restitution to the company and a lifetime ban from working in construction. 7 years. The judge said he was setting an example, that people in positions of power have a responsibility to the public, and Donovan violated that trust in the worst possible way. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city. 7 years wasn't enough. Not really. Not for the lives Donovan had endangered, the careers he'd destroyed, the corners he'd cut. But it was something. It was accountability. How do you feel? Arya asked. I don't know. Relieved, I guess, like I can finally breathe. Good. You deserve that. So do you. She was quiet for a moment. Come to dinner tonight. My place. I want to cook for you. You cook? Badly, but I want to try. Ethan smiled. Okay. What time? 7. And Ethan? Yeah. Bring Dylan. I want him there too. Arya's apartment was on the 23rd floor of a building downtown, all glass and clean lines and furniture that looked too expensive to sit on. Dylan's eyes went wide when they walked in. Whoa, he breathed. Arya laughed. You like it? It's like a spaceship. I'll take that as a compliment. Dinner was pasta, slightly overcooked, sauce from a jar, but made with obvious effort. They ate at the dining table, Dylan chattering about school while Arya asked questions and Ethan watched them interact. It felt domestic, normal, like maybe they could actually be something resembling a family. After dinner, Dylan fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from talking. Arya covered him with a blanket and she and Ethan moved to the balcony, looking out at the city lights. I'm glad you brought him, Arya said. He likes you. I like him too. He's a good kid. He is. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Arya said, I've been thinking about something. What? Us. What this is. What it could be. Ethan's heart picked up speed. Okay. I don't want to rush anything. I know you've got Dylan to think about, and work is complicated, and there's 100 reasons why this could go wrong, but I also don't want to pretend this isn't happening, that we're just colleagues or friends or whatever we're supposed to call it. What do you want to call it? She turned to face him. I want to call it real. I want to see where this goes without worrying about what people will think or whether it's appropriate. I want... She stopped, searching for words. I want to be with you, if you want that too. Ethan looked at her, this brilliant, fierce woman who'd walked into his life and turned everything upside down, and realized he'd been waiting for this moment since the day he met her. I do, he said, but you need to know what you're getting into. I'm a single dad with baggage and bills and a kid who's going to need a lot of attention. I work too much, I worry about everything, and I'm probably going to mess this up at some point because I've never been good at relationships. I'm a workaholic with control issues who doesn't know how to turn off her brain. I'm going to want to fix problems that aren't mine to fix. And I'm terrified of failing at this because I failed at everything else that wasn't work. So we're both disasters. Pretty much. He smiled. Then I guess we're perfect for each other. She laughed, and the sound made something in him settle. She stepped closer, and he reached for her, pulling her into a kiss that felt like coming home. They stood there on the balcony, the city spread out below them, and Ethan thought about all the ways his life had changed. The dare, the truth, the fight, and now this. I'm scared, he admitted when they pulled apart. Me too. But I want to try. Then let's try Tet. Tower Zenith was completed the following spring. 40 stories of glass and steel built the right way from the ground up. The grand opening was a massive event. City officials, press, employees, investors. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, watching people marvel at the building, and felt something like pride. Dylan tugged on his sleeve. Is that the one you built? I helped build it. It's really tall. Yeah, it is. Arya found them in the crowd looking radiant in a navy dress. There you are. The mayor wants to meet you. The mayor can wait. I'm with my kid. She smiled. Both of you, then. They walked through the lobby together, Dylan between them, and people stopped to shake Ethan's hand, to thank him, to tell him what an inspiration he was. It felt surreal. 6 months ago, he'd been nobody. Now he was the guy who'd stood up to corruption and won. The mayor was a short woman with a firm handshake and a genuine smile. Mr. Cole, I've heard amazing things about you. Thank you, ma'am. This building is a testament to what's possible when people refuse to compromise on safety. We're lucky to have you in this city. After she left, Ethan turned to Arya. I still can't believe this is real. It's real. You made it real. We made it real. She took his hand, not caring who saw. Yeah, we did. That night, after Dylan was asleep and Arya had gone home, Ethan sat on his couch and thought about everything that had happened. The journey from construction worker to VP, from invisible to recognized, from scared to something approaching confident. But more than that, he thought about what it meant to do the right thing, how it wasn't about being fearless or perfect or having all the answers. It was about showing up when it mattered, about refusing to look away when something was wrong, about choosing integrity over comfort, even when the cost was high. He thought about Dylan, asleep in the next room, and the kind of man he wanted his son to become. Not someone who never made mistakes, not someone who always won, just someone who tried, someone who cared, someone who knew that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. His phone buzzed, a text from Arya. Thank you for tonight, for everything. You've changed my life, he typed back. You changed mine first. We changed each other's. That's how it's supposed to work. He smiled, set the phone down, and leaned back. Outside, the city hummed with life. Somewhere, Tower Zenith stood tall, a monument to what happened when you refused to compromise. And here, in this small apartment with worn furniture and peeling paint, Ethan Cole felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he'd finally found where he belonged. Botsam. 6 months later, Ethan stood at a podium in front of the National Construction Safety Board, presenting findings from the task force he'd joined. The room was full of industry leaders, government officials, people who could actually make changes. And they were listening to him, to his ideas, to his experience. The problem isn't that people don't know what's right, he said, looking out at the crowd. It's that the system punishes them for doing it. We fire whistleblowers. We blacklist people who ask questions. We reward cost-cutting over safety. And then we act surprised when buildings fail and people die. He paused, letting the words sink in. If we want to change this industry, we have to change the incentives. We have to protect people who speak up. We have to make it easier to do the right thing than to cut corners. And we have to hold people accountable when they choose profit over safety. The presentation lasted an hour. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. People came up afterward to shake his hand, to ask questions, to tell him they agreed. And Ethan stood there, still a little overwhelmed, still not quite believing this was his life now. Arya was waiting outside. You were incredible. I was nervous. You didn't look it. Good. Because I almost threw up twice. She laughed, linking her arm through his. Come on, let's get out of here. They walked through the city, no destination in mind, just enjoying being together. They'd been officially dating for 4 months now, and it was still new enough to feel exciting, comfortable enough to feel right. Dylan adored her. She taught him how to play chess and listened to his dinosaur facts without ever looking bored. And Ethan had started to let himself imagine a future where this wasn't temporary, where they built something lasting. "I got offered another job today," he said as they walked. Arya stopped. "What?" "Some private consulting firm. They want me to review construction projects, testify in fraud cases, help companies implement better safety protocols." "That's amazing. Are you going to take it?" "I don't know. It's a lot of money, more than I'm making now. But it would mean leaving the company, leaving you." She studied his face. "Is that what you want?" "I want to make a difference, but I also want to be where you are." "Then stay. We'll make you a counteroffer. More money, more flexibility. You can consult on the side if you want, but don't leave because you think you have to. What if people say I'm only staying because we're together? Then let them say it. Who cares? You should care. It could hurt your reputation." She stepped closer, taking his hands. "Ethan, listen to me. I spent years worrying about what people thought, about being perfect, about never showing weakness, and it made me miserable. You taught me that integrity matters more than image, that doing the right thing is more important than looking good. So if people want to judge me for being with you, let them. I know the truth, and that's enough." He kissed her then, right there on the sidewalk, not caring who saw. Because she was right. The truth was enough. A year after the trial, Tower Zenith won an award for engineering excellence. The company threw a party to celebrate, and Ethan brought Dylan, who wore a suit that was slightly too big and looked adorably grown up. The venue was fancy, chandeliers and champagne, and people in clothes that cost more than Ethan used to make in a month. But he didn't feel out of place anymore. He belonged here now, not because of his title or his salary, but because he'd earned it. Richard Hale found him near the bar, the board member who'd been skeptical when Arya first hired him. "Ethan, can I have a word?" "Sure." They stepped out onto a terrace overlooking the city. Richard was quiet for a moment, then said, "I owe you an apology." Ethan blinked. "For what?" "For doubting you. When Arya first proposed making you director of safety, I thought she was making a mistake. I thought you didn't have the qualifications, the background, the experience. I was wrong." "You weren't entirely wrong. I didn't have those things." "No, but you had something more important. You had integrity, and you had the courage to act on it. That's worth more than any degree." Richard paused. "This company is better because you're here. I wanted you to know that." He held out his hand. Ethan shook it. "Thank you, sir." "Call me Richard. We're colleagues now." After he left, Arya appeared, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. What did Richard want? To apologize. "Seriously?" "Seriously." She handed him a glass. "You've won everyone over. You know that, right? Even the people who didn't believe in you at first, they all see it now." "See what?" "That you're exactly what this company needed, what I needed." They clinked glasses, and Ethan looked out at the city, at Tower Zenith's lights glowing in the distance, and thought about how far he'd come. From a dare that was supposed to humiliate him to this, to respect, to love, to a life that felt like it mattered. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," he admitted. "Why?" "Because it always does. Because good things don't last. Because—" She put a finger to his lips. "Stop. You deserve this. All of it. And it's not going to disappear just because you're happy." "How do you know?" "Because we built it together. And things we build together last." Hold. 2 years after that first dare, Ethan stood at the altar in a small ceremony surrounded by people who mattered. Dylan was his best man, grinning ear to ear in a suit that actually fit this time. Jimmy Ortiz was there, along with Paul Hendricks and Rosa and half the crew from Tower Zenith. Richard Hale, Susan Ortega, James Chen. People who'd become more than colleagues, who'd become friends. And at the end of the aisle, in a simple white dress that took his breath away, stood Arya. The ceremony was short. They'd written their own vows, and when it was Ethan's turn, he looked at her and said, "I spent most of my life feeling invisible, like I didn't matter, like nothing I did would ever be enough. And then you saw me. Not just who I was, but who I could be. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And you taught me that doing the right thing doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. He paused, his voice catching. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll always get it right. But I know that as long as I have you and Dylan, I'll keep trying, because you two are worth trying for. Arya was crying, and so was half the room. When it was her turn, she said, You walked into my office covered in dust, risking everything to tell the truth. And I knew. I knew you were different, that you were real in a way most people aren't. You didn't care about impressing me. You cared about doing what was right. And that changed everything. She took his hands. You made me remember why I do this work. Why I fight. You made me believe that people still matter more than profit. And you showed me that love doesn't have to be complicated. It can be simple. It can be true. It can be this. The officiant pronounced them married, and Ethan kissed his wife while Dylan cheered and the room erupted in applause. At the reception, Dylan gave a toast that was mostly about dinosaurs, but ended with, My dad says doing the right thing is scary, but you do it anyway. And I think marrying Arya was the rightest thing he ever did. So congratulations, Dad. You did good. The room laughed and cheered, and Ethan pulled his son into a hug, feeling like his heart might burst. Later, as they danced, Arya said, We made it. Yeah, we did. It wasn't easy. No, but it was worth it. She rested her head on his shoulder. Every single second. Potson. 5 years later, Ethan stood at another construction site. Not Tower Zenith, but something new. A community center in a neighborhood that needed it, funded by the company's new social responsibility initiative. Dylan was 12 now, taller and gangly, asking if he could help with the measurements. Arya was there too, pregnant with their second child, glowing despite her insistence that she felt like a whale. Paul Hendricks walked over, blueprints in hand. Load calculations look good. We're ahead of schedule. Good. Let's keep it that way. Paul nodded and walked off. Ethan watched him go, then turned back to the site. 5 years ago, he'd been fighting just to survive. Now he was building things that mattered, changing an industry, raising a family, living a life he'd never dared to imagine. Dad? Dylan said. Why are you smiling? I'm just happy, buddy. About what? Ethan looked at his son, at Arya, at the building taking shape around them. About all of it. About getting to do this with you guys. Dylan rolled his eyes. You're being sappy again. Yeah, I am. That night, after Dylan was asleep and Arya was reading in bed, Ethan sat on the balcony of the house they'd bought, a real house with a yard and everything, and thought about the path that had led him here. The dare, the choice, the fight, the truth. He thought about Marcus Donovan, serving time in a minimum security prison, and felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't pity either. Just acceptance that some people chose the easy path and some chose the right one, and those choices defined who you became. He thought about all the people who'd helped him along the way. Arya, who'd believed in him. Jimmy, who'd stood by him. Paul, who'd learned to respect him. Dylan, who'd given him a reason to be better. And he thought about the lesson he'd learned through all of it. That integrity wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up. About telling the truth even when it cost you. About choosing what was right over what was easy, every single day, even when no one was watching. Because in the end, that was the only thing that really mattered. Not money or status or recognition, just knowing that when your kid asked you what kind of person you were, you could look him in the eye and tell the truth. Arya joined him on the balcony, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. How lucky I am. We're both lucky. He pulled her close, resting his hand on her belly, feeling their daughter kick. Yeah, we are. They sat there in the quiet, watching the city lights, and Ethan felt something he'd spent most of his life searching for. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. The knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Doing the right thing had cost him everything. His job, his safety, his certainty. But it had also given him everything that mattered. Love. Family. A life built on truth instead of lies. And if he had to do it all over again, he wouldn't change a single thing. Because some risks are worth taking, some fights are worth fighting, and some truths are worth telling, no matter the cost. That was the lesson. That was what mattered. That was enough.